What I love about action heroes today is they can be wounded. They can acknowledge the fear. They can acknowledge the pain, the sadness, whatever. It doesn't still define or keep them from doing what they know they need to do.
One of the responses is you guys are contributing to everything that is weak about masculinity, about men today. Vulnerability is for women. I mean, those were some of the words used. That's still very prevalent in today's society.
And the warrior mindset is bring that shit on.
Right.
I'm ready to face it, and I'm not going down. And if I go down, I'm getting back up.
The aggression, the intimidation, you have to be the strongest person in the room to have any value.
Hi, and welcome to the Living Richly podcast. So excited that you are here with us today. Eric and I are going to continue our conversation around mindful masculinity.
Yeah.
It has been a few weeks. Of course, last time we had this topic was with Kelly Flanagan.
Oh, my God. And if people haven't watched that episode, I am still unpacking. I think I've watched it 3 times.
So good.
Definitely, if folks haven't watched it, they need to go back.
They got to go back.
Episode 85 with Kelly.
There you go. Look at you.
Great show. Yeah.
But prior to that, we had started to unpack some of the different stereotypes that men, the male stereotypes, the male archetypes, and we were looked at a couple of them already. Maybe let's take a minute before we dive into today, what we're going to talk about. We talked about, first of all, the lone wolf.
Yeah, the lone wolf. So the ability to channel your self-reliance, your independence, your resilience to stand out on your own, because life is going to require that of you many times throughout your existence in terms of carving out your own existence. The problem is the lonely wolf, or the lone wolf, can become the lonely wolf, isolated, alone, and that can be really problematic.
Yeah, and so then we went from there to the stoic.
Oh, stoic, yeah.
But talk about what the stoic.
How to be stoic without getting stuck emotionally. Ooh. And actually, since then, I've read a great book called How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, which is all about Marcus Aurelius, a famous stoic, and phenomenal book. Again, we translate the word stoic now to mean unemotional. The original Stoics were not unemotional, but they used logic and thinking and a disciplined mind to manage the more negative emotions that sometimes get us into trouble.
So what I love of what we've been doing with this series is, and we're calling it mindful masculinity, not toxic masculinity.
Right. We don't want that.
Because we recognize that in all of these archetypes, I can't say the word today, there are both good and bad. There are both reasons and times to lean in to it, and there are challenges and dangers to be aware of. And that's what we're going to continue our theme today. Now, I'm super excited about today.
Me too, because I'm going to get to geek out.
We're going to be like little kids. So we're going to be talking about the proper word that is used when we talk about this archetype is the warrior. But we like the live action hero as kind of the real language around it. We'll talk about why it's called the warrior and look at some of the different where the origination of this type is found. But we want to start out just by geeking out a little bit and talk about live action heroes. Greatest live action hero you growing up.
Okay, on the big screen, if we're talking about action heroes in the 80s and 90s, I think I geeked out on those films growing up. The battle between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone to wear the crown of the live action hero was something else. Favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movie for you?
I think it's got to be Terminator. And Terminator 2.
Which one?
Terminator 2 was really, it was
great series.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the first times, well, not the first time.
I'll be back.
One of the first times where a sequel outdid the original. Not the first time.
Yep.
But almost. It was one of the, you got Godfather. The second Godfather is certainly the Godfather. Some would argue Empire Strikes Back is the Star Wars movie, right?
Exactly.
And Terminator 2 would be the Terminator movie.
Yeah. For me, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie that stands out was much earlier than the Terminator series. Long after Conan. We were talking about Conan the Barbarian and how that one, he made his cinematic really debut. That's when he really became famous. He was just coming off the Mr. Universe scene, and he was pumped pumped up, and he was jacked to no end, and he does these Conan movies. But it was later on he did the Commando movie. Do you remember Commando?
Yes. Yeah.
Of all the ones he did, and I might be wrong, and maybe I've got my facts wrong, but my memory is that he had the best one-liners, one after another in that movie. And again, just like invincible, bullets flying all around him, but never touched him. Right? Yeah. Well, I think he got wounded once, but
I think for me, my favorite action hero would have been, again, this was, we were talking again off air, that we just enough years difference. For me, the real formative years, I was 10 years old when Star Wars came out. It came out in 1977, and I was 10 years old, and I remember being in awe of Han Solo.
Right.
Looking at this rebel, this the kind of character he was exactly, as a 10-year-old, that's who I wanted to grow up and be. And I can remember that would be my role playing, in my my room or whatever would be. I would always be pretending I'm Han Solo.
Yeah, for me, definitely it was Luke Skywalker, only because he's the first Jedi you meet in that series of movies, and every little kid after that wanted to watch a lightsaber. I've talked about my now favorite villain would be Darth Vader.
Yeah,
because they are likewise they're just the best. If we go back to live action here outside of Star Wars, favorite Sylvester Stallone movie?
Rambo.
Rambo, yeah.
I
Which one?
Well, so it'd be a mixture. Well, the first Rambo, I think there was something about it. First Blood, I think was the best. You could argue there's a number of them for sure. For you, it's
definitely Rocky, the whole Rocky series.
And same, right? Like, I think those are both. Those characters again come to life for certainly young boys.
I was 14 years old, and I remember the theme music, that the soundtrack for Rocky 3, and I would use that to work out whenever I worked out my basement with my little weight set. It was to that shift. Let's go to like superheroes. All right, so I'm going to put some pressure on you. Actually, Steve, what's your favorite Schwarzenegger movie? True Lies. Okay. Oh, that's a good one.
Jamie Lee Curtis.
That was And favorite Stallone movie?
Rambo,
definitely. Okay, all right. Let's go back to the or go to the superhero category now. And for Steve, favorite superhero?
Deadpool.
Good call. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Because he's actually a mutant, right? And they were in. Well, anyway, I'm not going to. we could use up a lot of time here.
This is living richly.
Now, for you, I'm going to hold you to a higher standard. I want you to pick your favorite Marvel superhero and your favorite DC Comics superhero.
And I appreciate you're holding me to a different standard.
I am.
You are the geek master. You
should meet my son.
You and your son Sam are. Sometimes I sit and listen to the two of you talk about Marvel or Star Wars, and you're getting into, like, you guys know every detail of all the timelines.
Compared to him, I'm a Padawan. He's a Jedi master.
He is absolutely incredible with it. And so my exposure's a little bit different because I wasn't really into it. It took me, now Marvel didn't really start to shine until we were adults.
Right.
And so I was less, drawn to it. I would say on the DC side, it would be Christian Bale's Batman.
Oh, Batman. That's a great
But it would be his Batman, not just any Batman, but it would be very specific to him.
The Dark Knight.
The Dark Knight series. And the Dark Knight series. Heath Ledger's Joker was absolutely one of the greatest villain characters in cinematic history. I think on the Marvel side, this is it's a bit of a struggle for me. Maybe Thor.
Okay, yeah.
Like, but I'm saying that
you don't seem very convinced.
Well, yeah. Now I'm almost saying that as a question.
Like,
is that acceptable? Because I think they were all. I enjoyed them and everything like that, but I didn't get into it where I would say that's the guy for me.
Well, so on the DC side, you and I are on the same page. For me, Batman has always been one of my favorites on the DC side. And I'll explain why in a second. When I go over to the Marvel side, actually, my favorite has always been Captain America, right? For the longest time. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Both on the DC side and the Marvel side, both those characters are not superhuman beings with like almost like Thor's almost godlike.
Yeah,
right? He's actually a god, according to
me.
Like you, exactly. That's exactly where my mind went.
Okay, yeah, I thought so.
See, there was a question. See how I said that with a question on the end? Yeah. But you think of Captain America and his character, I can do this all day, constantly picking himself up from impossible situations, facing difficult odds. And yes, he was strong and he was fast, but compared to a lot of his peers, he did not have the same level of power. It was his determination and grit. And on the DC side, Batman also didn't have superpowers.
Yes.
He was all about training and gadgets and making the most of every situation. So they were both heroes, I think, I could relate to because they were more human.
Now,
Does that make sense?
Captain America, of course,
super soldier.
Yeah,
he was super soldier.
And it's interesting. I kind of, as soon as you said it, well, of course, how did I not guess that out of the gate? Your Jeep is Captain America.
Oh, come on. Don't say that on the podcast.
Got the Captain America.
Like custom wrap.
Eric is geeky enough that he wrapped his Jeep Gladiator in Captain America colors.
I did. Now, most people would not know it. I have to show them that there's a shield, a very kind of discreet shield on the hood of the Jeep, but absolutely. But the reality is, like, as kids growing up, young boys growing up, we were deeply influenced by these images on the big screen. And when we think of, again, for us, it was live action heroes, but in previous civilizations, like hundreds and even thousands of years ago, the live action hero for them was the warrior.
Well, and before we even go there, like just to go back to the live action hero in movies and in books, and
a couple of recent,
but certainly in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they were all men. Right. Almost. There might, I could probably be challenged that there was a female or two character.
Yeah.
But in almost all of the 70s and 80s, the live action, and why it becomes now something that we wrestle with as men is because all we saw on the screen, all we read in the books we read during that generation were these incredibly strong, masculine, all of the things we define as masculine were shown in these action heroes.
Yeah. And think of even a couple of great movies that a lot of folks will probably likely remember that actually depicted times long before our present time. Think of, for example, Braveheart and the liberation of Scotland. And I know that it's not a true story. It's based on true events, but very loosely. It's a dramatization, of course. And the other one would be Gladiator, right? Where again, you've got two warriors that are highly esteemed. One, because he's fighting to liberate his people. One who's fighting to find his freedom and take out an evil emperor. Two
movies that are in my top 5 favorite all-time movies. I go back and watch all the time.
Same.
As would most men are, in our age bracket, they would list those two movies.
What you do in life echoes in eternity.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many great lines that we could, but I think that again, go back to whether it's the ancient samurai or other civilizations where again, the hero was the warrior, the one able to defend, protect, fight, the strength, the prowess of that. And we admire these heroes. I mean, curious, what do we admire about them?
My tattoos, my entire left arm of tattoos are warriors.
Wow.
That's my theme, right? You've got the Knights of the Templar. You've got the samurai. You've got the indigenous Geronimo warrior, right?
Wow.
That was my whole thing when I had this theme done on my arm was around
your
the
right
warriors.
Arm, and you're on your right arm, it's lilies and daisies.
No. But there's nothing wrong with that.
No, there's not. I was just trying to poke fun at you there.
Yeah.
But when we think about it, if we just back up for a second and say, what is it about these characters? I mean, there's some obvious things, but some not so obvious. What are some of the things that we admire about them? Like when you think of those live action heroes, as you sat there watching that growing up, it is, although it's entertainment, we're learning about what society values and what is popular and what is famous. I mean, there's a great clip online. I think you can look it up on YouTube, and it's about cool guys don't look at explosions or something of that nature.
Yeah,
and it's a whole series. It's a song, and all these explosions going off in the background, and the hero's just walking away, doesn't even flinch, doesn't even look backwards, right? But we're learning about values as we take in this information, and yet this archetype, like I said, has been there from.
And I know for me why they were so impressionable in those days, and even to this day, why I will gravitate towards that warrior type movie was because, again, my childhood was so kind of chaotic,
right?
And there was so much that was happening, and so much unhealthiness and brokenness, and all of this. Is I would look at these action heroes that nothing kept them down, nothing hurt them. They were impenetrable, right? Like everything about them, they demonstrated strength and the confidence, and everything that I was lacking, I saw in them, and I idolized it.
Right. And I think, like, again, most kids, when you ask them who their idols were, you might have had a phase in our lives where you said my dad or this or that, but most of the time we go to these,
I never heard
these
that.
larger, I know for you, your story is very, very different, but it's, again, we were raised around these archetypes or these models that are just, but I mean, I guess even Superman's got his kryptonite, but let's face it, like his one weakness and in the rest of life, he's in like undefeatable.
Well, that's and you talk about even the people we in real life that we idolize. I know for me, right, I can remember at 13 when we would, my stepdad would have parties at the house, and all these bikers would be over, and you'd have all these guys from some of the outlaw clubs and everything like this. And there was a guy from one of the outlaw clubs, his name was Mountain Man, and he was probably, I don't know how tall he really was, probably 6'5" or something like that, but he looked like he was 10 feet tall to me as a 13-year-old, and just this strong, this guy that was just incredible. And I remember being, to quickly tell a story of being at, there was a Camp Fortune used to have these sleds. I think they brought them back, but at the time, and me and my stepbrother were goofing around.
You're talking about those
cement.
My God, that was dangerous. If your knee stuck out or your elbow.
So we're goofing around, we're ramming into each other. So sure enough, we get to the bottom, and the guy at the bottom kicks us off, and we go back to where some of the bikers are sitting around, and my stepdad said, "Why are you guys? What happened? We got kicked off. We're not allowed to go back." Mountain Man stands up, walks us back over to the guy, and just looks at him and says, "You're not kicking these guys off, are you?" And the guy just cowered and, "No, sir, you kids can come back on." And I remember from that moment, it was like, all I ever want to be is Mountain Man.
Right. And you think of, again, the things that we admire, they have a dark side, right?
Of course they do.
The aggression, the intimidation, you have to be the strongest person in the room to have any value. There's all these mixed messages being sent in all of that, that downplays things like empathy, downplays superpowers like vulnerability, emotional intelligence, the ability to connect, the ability to communicate, the ability to emote.
Yeah.
Think of most superheroes, not very emotional, right? Like live action heroes. Like I remember the thing about Arnold that was like legendary for him is like his face was deadpan the whole time. Yeah. Like you didn't really see him emote much. And so I think what the messages that sends to men is that in order to be strong, in order to provide, in order to protect your family and protect what you have and you've built, you have to be a certain way.
And I think it's a generational thing. And I want to talk about some of the advantages of this archetype in a moment. I want to talk about why we want to lean into them. But just to that point, it's shifted. And we see today, we certainly see we see a lot more female action
strong
heroes.
leads. It's so great to see that.
Right?
Yeah.
Warrior type females.
Yep.
But we also see now the superheroes is certainly in Marvel, in even in DC, and
more flawed than they used to be.
Way
demonstrated.
more flawed, and of course, probably the biggest show on television as of this recording is on on Amazon Prime, superheroes, where like they're the boys.
Oh my god!
Right? Like
have you seen that show?
Yeah, yeah.
It's disturbing. It's like you need therapy after every session.
Like talk about flawed superheroes, right? Like,
well, they're actually superheroes, but they're actually the villains. Right? Like
Exactly. And that's but the point is that I think it's shifted where people, certainly younger people today, wouldn't relate to the view of the action hero as we saw it to the same degree.
Yeah.
And, people argue whether that's good or bad. I think it's good to be able to. But let's talk about some of the how does leaning into the live action hero benefit us as men, professionally and personally? What are some of the advantages of having that mindset?
Well, certainly, like when you think of live action heroes, we often think of physical prowess and strength. Right? We think of, again, I go back to the two most influential action heroes. You think of Schwarzenegger and Stallone back in those years, and how ripped they were. I mean, it was actually amazing to watch Stallone's transformation over about a 10, 15 year period. He went like every movie, he was more ripped, more ripped, more jacked. And so certainly there's always this notion of physical strength. I think there's a lot of pressure still on young men and men in general to look a certain way and be a certain way. But there's this notion of their mental strength. To me, like the ability to face off with impossible odds. Again, I go back to the Captain America motto, I could do this all day. And this is where he's before his transformation, before he becomes a super soldier. He's this scrawny little kid, right, from New York, like Brooklyn. And he's one of the opening scenes. He's getting the snot kicked out of him by this bigger dude. And he just keeps getting up. He just keeps getting up. And so to me, like when we talk about channeling the warrior, channeling the live action hero, is that there's great strength in the ability to find the courage to keep getting up, right? To keep, I love, there's a saying, and I'm not going to do it justice, but courage is sometimes a soft voice at the end of the day that's not quite gone the way you wanted. And it's a soft whisper that says, I'm going to try again tomorrow. That's courage, right? So to me, I think that mental fortitude and resilience, that how often are we going to face off with difficult shit in our lives, and the ability to tap into, I can do this. I've been here before. We talked about it so much on the show in other episodes, but I think that's a really tremendous strength.
And I think absolutely, and I think the tenacity that comes along with that, right? The willingness to say, and because we see this today in so many cases, people fall into that victim mindset, and they give up too soon. They give up as soon as the first storm hits or the first challenge hits. The warrior mindset is bring that shit on.
Right.
I'm ready to face it, and I'm not going down. And if I go down, I'm getting back up. And it's that constant, that tenacity to push through until victory comes.
Yeah, and that's not with an absence of fear.
No.
Right? Again, I think a lot of folks, when hard stuff lands on their doorstep, to your point, the victim mindset starts to show up. And one of the true, most significant signs, obvious signs of the victim mindset is a lot of complaining. You just start to complain. So rather than channeling right, that courage, and again, courage is still my favorite definition is courage is fear walking. Courage is what John Wayne said, is being afraid but getting in the saddle anyway, right? Like it's not the absence of fear. And I think sometimes in older versions of the live action hero, the hero is almost seen as having zero fear, no emotion, right? Like I'm impervious to all that, I'm above all that. And I think that sent a message to men that we it's bad to, like, somehow you're deficient as a man if you feel fear or you feel intimidation or you feel scared, you feel vulnerable. I think these are normal human emotions. Even the Stoics would say, so Seneca, who was one of their greatest philosophers, right, who helped spread the and start the Stoic philosophy, is said of one time he's at sea on a ship and a bad storm comes along, and instead of channeling sort of like, no, I'm going to be okay, and no, he got so scared he he jumped out of the boat and almost lost his life when he would have been much safer staying in the boat. So it's not a perfect courage that we're talking about here, but the ability to tap into a measure of strength that in that moment can almost feel like it's supernatural, like it's beyond you, right? Yeah. And so it feels like you're moving into this something, but you gotta channel the strength and channel your courage.
And I think it's, because we often talk about with this mindset, or with the live action hero, it's the guy who basically he gets his leg cut off and it's just a flesh wound, right? And kind of brushes it off a little bit. I'm going into Monty Python. I'm not
don't start there. Python, start there. We're just gonna lose this show.
But the notion, or you see the sports player, the hockey player who he breaks a bone and he just they throw a little bit of tape on it and he gets back out there. Right. It's okay to pause and feel. I think what I love about action heroes today is they can be wounded. They can acknowledge the fear. They can acknowledge the pain, the sadness, whatever. It doesn't still define or keep them from doing what they know they need to do.
Yeah, and I love you raised this several shows back when we were starting to talk about that, the shift that we're seeing even on the big screen about how heroes are depicted. Yeah. That I think we're getting. It's still Hollywood. It's still meant to sell movies, right? Sell tickets and streaming services and the like. But we're getting a bit more representation of a broader human experience than what we would have in the early years. Yeah. And I think again, anything that causes you to believe that vulnerability somehow is a weakness, that fear somehow makes you deficient, that feeling weak at times and not at your best, that somehow that makes you less than. I think those are the things we're trying to unearth to say, no, those are part of a man's experience as well. The real hero to me is the man who's able to acknowledge and at first just get in touch with what's going on under the hood, be able to connect with it, acknowledge it, and in spite of that, then channel something greater to the equation.
And maybe help me out here if you remember this, when Kelly Flanagan was on talking about shame, but he talked about the notion of real courage. And he talked about the if I'm trying to remember how he quoted it, if you recall, but the idea of it's not looking outward, it's facing the thing out.
He talked about, I think if I'm recalling what you're referring to, he said, I used to think a real man was someone who wasn't afraid of what's around him. He says, now I think a real man is someone who's not afraid of anything within him, right?
So that resonates with me around this notion. Yeah. But let's talk, we've been talking about courage. Maybe give me an example or a share of a time where you had to step out and courageously make a decision or do something that, and I know there's many, but maybe share with our listeners an example of a time when you had to do that.
Well, probably when I was feeling one of the most vulnerable places of my life was back in 2011 when I was my marriage had fallen apart and my family was falling apart. My career had fallen apart. I had a number of things all falling apart. And it was a really, really hard period of my life. Felt very vulnerable, very afraid. There was a lot of, I was probably borderline depressed, if not right over the line depressed at the time. But it was through those months of wrestling with all of that, people were telling me, Eric, just go get a job. Your young kids need some stability, especially as you navigate all this. And yet there was something deep inside of me that was saying, I did the responsible thing. I remember going to a bunch of interviews, dragging myself there, but knowing I needed to find a job. It's the first time in my life that I had been one of the first times that I was an employee somewhere, and it really didn't turn out so well. So that's why I've stuck to entrepreneurship. But I had lost that job, and I interviewed with about 3 different organizations, and all 3 of them wanted to hire me. And I remember in the conversation, part of me coming alive, that this was really resonating, but what I was awakening to is I didn't want to work for these leaders and these businesses, but I knew I could help them. Yeah. And that became really the context through which my first coaching company was launched, called Breakthrough Coach. And most of the people in my life, including family, called me crazy. They said, go get a stable job. Yeah. What are you doing? Starting your own business, right? You've never done this before. And I had my own own doubts. I mean, that I wrestled with, but that took a tremendous amount of courage at the time. But it was definitely fear walking. This wasn't like the emotionless, right? Like I got this. It was one day at a time, sometimes one moment at a time.
Yeah, I know for me, it would have been the moment when I made the decision to leave the church world, and you know, I don't, so I will never try to be the hero of that story. I did a lot of stupid, bad things, but I was not somebody. When I made the decision to end my marriage, when I made the decision to resign from the church, no one was putting that pressure on me. I could have continued to skate in the way and the behavior that I was in for probably years. I had been doing that for years, and I probably could have continued to do it. But I knew, and I remember having the belief of, I can't keep doing this with integrity. I'm lost my integrity in being in this pulpit, and I need to step away from that. And the courage it took to basically say, I have to be true here, even though I literally thought I had no options. I had no idea of what I was going to do. And when you and I first reconnected, we already knew each other after I had already made that decision, or right around. I think I came to you the week that I said, "Hey, Eric, I'm about to do this on Sunday.
Yeah.
You know, do you know anybody that's hiring? Because I need a job." And that's when I started, you know, when you asked me to, you know, have you ever thought about coaching, and that whole journey of us doing this together. But to be able to, in that moment, say, no, that was probably one of the most courageous moments of my life, because of the decision I made in that moment.
Right.
So
I just think we talk ourselves out of greatness all the time. I think there's a lot of men even listening to the show right now. If they manage to survive us geeking out there at the beginning, but I can guarantee you a bunch of them were like, "Hey, my favorite action hero was this guy." But I think we talk ourselves out of greatness all the time. We talk ourselves that I think there's a lot of men that say, I don't look the part, right? And when I say look the part, they're comparing themselves to this persona that's been portrayed in movie after movie, and right, that and this goes back thousands of years, right? Like because of the warrior archetype's been around a long time. Even Carl Jung, in his archetypes of the human personality, the warrior is one of them, right? We're relating it specifically to the archetype around men, specifically around the live action hero, but we talk ourselves out of greatness, and I think every man has greatness in him. I think every person has greatness within them. We just doubt ourselves so much. So it's the ability to understand that in spite of weakness, in spite of fear, in spite of doubts, in spite of limitations, in spite that we might not look the part, that there is greatness in us that is ready to be channeled.
One of the other kind of characteristics of the live action hero is discipline.
There's a word.
And so let's talk about discipline as an advantage, as one of the, you know, in one way that you can lean into the live action hero is to embrace the discipline that they demonstrated. What comes to mind for you when you think
what comes to mind for me right away is all the Rocky movies, and there was always that training montage partway through the movie where you see both athletes training, right? Whether it was Rocky and Apollo Creed, or it was Rocky and the Russian dude, I'm going to forget his name now. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name.
Igor. No.
It was Dolph Lundgren played the actor. It was called, his name was something else in the movie, and I feel terrible. I can't remember, but
I can't believe Steve doesn't know.
No, he got nothing.
Yeah, he got nothing. Yeah.
Is it Drago?
Hey! Yeah, Steve for the win. Oh my God. More than a producer, folks. Like, all right, producer plus here. But those fighting montages, and you watch the discipline of these athletes, right, to prepare for the fight. And I think the word discipline is a word that doesn't show up enough in our vocabulary anymore. A lot of folks, we use the language even in the world of business. There are a lot of wantrepreneurs who want to build their own business, want to strike out and follow their dream. But that dream better be followed with a lot of of determination and discipline to turn it into reality, because there will be hardship that comes, and it does require training and effort over time.
One of the greatest scenes in the Christian Bale Batman series is him being where right?
Yeah.
When he's trying to get out of the whatever that was called, the pit.
Yeah.
But he's trying the determination to climb and to get out, and all the other.
Well, even when he's so that was in the movie with Bane, but the movie before that, like the first one, where he's being trained by the League of Shadows on how to even become the Batman, right? And again, the strict discipline. Now that's not unless you're training as an athlete or whatever, the discipline's going to look different. But training to be a great father, training to be a great husband or mate, right? Training to be a great leader, like the discipline required to do that. I think it's, again, for a lot of people, the art of follow through, the art of day-to-day repetition of doing the small things over time. I think we're in a satisfy me now culture. We're in a microwave culture. We can't even stand in front of the microwave. We think it takes too long.
Right.
Everything we think is instant and easy, and it usually isn't.
Ben Bergeron, who was a guest on our podcast, and
that's way back.
Yeah, has written a number of books, but his book Chasing Excellence, and here's a guy who coached the winners, the champions of the CrossFit Games, both men and women. One of the only coaches to coach both in the same year, the male and female athlete, top athlete. And he talks about the discipline that's required to get to that level where 400,000 people compete at the start of the CrossFit Games, and you get down to, in August at the championships, you're down to the top 20 male and the top 20 female.
Wow.
Like, it's incredible to think of that. And he talks about it's all at that point mindset,
who wants
discipline. And by who wants it best, it's focusing, and he talks about, focusing on the things that are within my control and being disciplined to not get distracted by the things outside of that.
Yeah, well, usually the only difference between the winner and the loser is the winner just hung in longer.
Yeah.
Right? It took that extra discipline, that extra effort, that extra determination. Yeah. And I think discipline is something that any person can benefit from. How do I become more disciplined in my approach here? Right?
So there are lots of advantages.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges, some of the concerns. What would be at the top of that?
Top of my list is the emotional suppression. I think, again, the characterization of the hero and the warrior being this emotionless. Again, I'm going to use the modern word stoic, because the ancient word stoic would not be unemotional. It was more about emotional mastery.
Yes.
But in our society, when we refer to someone being stoic in our day and age, we're usually saying they're kind of flat emotionally, right? Like they don't have much emotional range. And I think, again, a lot of men struggle. We've been told it's not okay. Think of most action movies, and the plot is usually driven around rage and revenge.
Yeah.
Like, how many action movies, the guy might even be an average dude, usually former military though.
Almost always former military.
Almost former military. And like his family gets killed, or his dog, like take the
John Wick,
right? They killed his dog, for Christ's sake, right? And he goes on a killing rampage. Like, and that's celebrated. The rage and revenge is celebrated. And prized, and yet for men, it's like other emotions are not allowed, right? What was it that, again, Kelly said on the show when he was with us last, and I can't wait to have him back, but he said it's almost like men are only allowed about half of the human experience, and the rest we have to repress. Well, when you don't let emotions flow through you, when you don't have access or range on that front, you truly, we've said it before, it's like you're living in black and white versus color, and it's extremely unhealthy to repress all that emotion. What is it? He also said is you can't push stuff away. You can only push it down.
Right.
Well, why are we seeing an increase of heart disease among men? Why are we seeing rising rates of depression, clinical depression, and rising rates of suicide? Well, loneliness is a big part of that. But another big part of it is I think men have not known what to do with all this stuff going on under the hood.
Yeah.
And they have not felt like it's okay. okay to be themselves. And let's go back to the first show we did on this series. And what was one of the responses is you guys are contributing to everything that is weak about masculinity, about men today. Vulnerability is for women. I mean, those were some of the words used. That's still very prevalent in today's society.
And because, I mean, you look, if you know, again, all the classic heroes, the live action heroes, they're almost all are alone. Right? Our loneliness.
Yep.
Or they're in a relationship that basically falls apart because they refuse to, right? I've got to go save the world. And I don't, right? Like they, in almost all of these cases, their ability to connect with others is so limited. I kind of chuckle because we see, you know, people kind of started raising their hands even with the Marvel movies, for example. And it's like, and so they finally put this into the storyline, but it's like, you know, like every time you battle some villain, you're destroying cities, right? Like how is not 1,000 civilians being killed every time?
It's not okay. It's basically like 9/11 every time you guys do something,
right? But for them, again, because the live action hero will be like, well, that's just part of the price that we pay, right? No, it's the price they paid for your behavior.
I know when we talked about the former archetypes, I really resonated with the lone wolf. You resonated more with the stoic. And as we were preparing for this show, I kind of said, like, what was another formative character, and this was not from the big screen. It wasn't from comic books. It wasn't from the world of sci-fi. It was actually from our previous world, from the good book. And one of the characters that probably had the deepest influence over me from my mid-teens to my early 30s, probably the character that I admired the most, the stories. He was actually upheld as the king against which all other kings were measured in the Old Testament, and that was David. And again, for non-religious folks, King David was a kid that came. If you know the story of David and Goliath, he's the young shepherd boy who, with a sling and a stone, took out an enemy combatant that would have been about 10 feet tall, was described as being almost like a giant, and takes him down with a spear, with a sling and a stone, and he would become a very famous hero in at the time in Israel, among his people, and eventually would be crowned king. And he made a lot of mistakes, but what was amazing about him is he demonstrated both the warrior archetype, but he was also a poet. And he wrote songs, and he had this expressive side to him that I always really resonated with. Now, I wish I would have idolized Solomon a bit more, because I could have learned some. I wish I would have known more about emotional self-regulation as a younger kid. I had a lot of anger, and that followed me into my adult years.
But you're right, David. A lot of his in the poems that he wrote, they are filled with emotion, and they're filled with and the wide range. I mean, there was some rage in some of his poems, and the desire for revenge in some of them, right? But there was also the humility and brokenness and the vulnerability, and all of those things were composed there. I think it's a great example of someone who he was the wounded warrior, the classic action, you know, hero, but we also had flaws.
Yeah. There's a saying that I read recently that repression leads to depression, right? When we push what is natural, and I get that for a lot of men, they've not had, that was a big influence for me. So for me, emoting, tapping into my emotions, the ability to shed a tear when that's appropriate, the ability to, now I struggled with managing it all, and it's only in more recent years I've learned better tools for doing that through mindset work and a more disciplined mind. But I think a disciplined mind with a heart that is open, you begin to experience life in a much more full measure. But that's not always what's demonstrated in the warrior and the live action hero.
What are some of the other challenges? Because I think I love that emotional suppression. I think there's the isolation or some challenges. You mentioned again about rage. I think certainly aggression is a huge one of the challenges, that when somebody is in that environment, you don't know how to step out of it, right? It's to be able. I used to share the story of I would be when I was doing Bikers Church, and I would be at a biker event, and you're around Hell's Angels and Outlaws and different bike clubs, and you've got to be on your guard, even as a pastor, and they called me Rev at the time in that situation. You had to be on you had to be strong and tough because they looked for weakness, right? You talked tough back to them. You pushed back if somebody challenged.
That's all they respected.
That's what they respected.
Yeah.
And then I would be doing that on a Saturday at some kind of a bike event, and then the Sunday I would be at the regular church, sitting there listening to a 80-year-old lady, a grandmother, talking about her knitting or something like that, and being able to make that. It was incredibly hard not to be just like, make that shift, right? To be too sensitive. What's been your experience with?
Well, I think again, there is something about the culture that idolizes that toughness, that emotional detachment, right? That somehow that is to be prized, and that is what a hero looks like and feels like. And yet I think if you talk to most women about their significant other, and if they would say, well, he's emotionally detached, he can't connect, he struggles to show emotion, and that's a big part of why we're having problems. I think, again, what we idolize and what we want in real life is often so disconnected.
It's a mixed message, right?
Yeah.
Kelly Flanagan talked about this when he said, you were just sharing about that, about, how the women received that. The message, it's a mixed message around, again, what we idolize and what we want. It's like, oh, wait a minute. No, I want somebody who's present, all of this stuff. And I do think this is where we're not trashing any of these models. I am a big believer that as the man in this house, as the father, as the husband, I am the protector. You come into this house, you break into this house, and I will protect with my life, Wendy.
Yeah.
I will absolutely, I'll go down swinging, but I am not going to cower.
Brother, if you and I are ever in the woods and we encounter a bear,
I'm gonna run faster than you.
I'm gonna kick you in the ankles.
I'm gonna swing a hammer at your knee.
You don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you.
And I am so confident that I'll outrun you. And if we'll just bring Steve along.
Steve, it was nice knowing you.
Yeah. We'll video it, Steve. No, but so I think embrace that. I want to be the strong protector of my home. I want to be that strong protector for my children, but I also want to be emotionally connected.
Right. It's understanding the full range. And, again, I think what we're trying to do in these conversations, and we're no experts at this, but we have been men for a long time, so we can relate to the challenges and to the mixed messages we've received over time. And again, we're just inviting folks to a conversation to consider some of these things and how they might channel the strengths of these archetypes. It's almost like we're trying to redeem or reclaim the better parts of these and maybe shine a light on where they get us into trouble. So we're not saying reject it altogether. We're not trying to be overly woke. We're not trying to follow any trends. We're just trying to say, what does it mean to be a real man in today's culture? And these archetypes actually have a lot to teach us. But it's like anything over time, there's truth and then there's fable.
Yeah.
There's what the story really was and what it's become over time, right? I remember an Anglican friend of mine, this back in my church days, he was a good friend of mine. He told me, I'm a former Catholic. When I was young, I grew up Roman Catholic. And part of the Protestant thing, right, is they rebelled against the whole worship of Mary. And he explained to me, he said, you understand that when you go back to the original stuff around that, it was less about worshiping Mary. It was just honoring her for being a teenage girl, having to, I'm pregnant and God did it, right? Like the story is kind of crazy. And the courage it took for her to do that and then stand by her son throughout his lifetime and watch him die. So there's the truth. Now, again, that's if you believe that's actually true, but whether it's a true story or it's a story that's made up, there's the initial truth of it, and then there's the fable or the extra canon that gets added over time, and in that canon can be a real mixed bag.
We've got about 3 minutes or
3 minutes.
Yeah, 3 to 4 minutes.
That's pressure.
At max. So we've been leaning so much into mindful masculinity.
Yeah.
So how does one somebody who embraces the live action hero lean into mindful masculinity? What would be one or two things that you would say are kind of starting points for that?
I think it's, again, mindfulness is about paying attention to what you're doing while you're doing it. So rather than just living according to this program and these societal expectations and following them along blindly. It's hold them up. Like, hold them up in front of you and say, is this how I want to live my life? Do I want to only experience half the human experience?
Yeah.
Because Hollywood has told me that's so, or, these ancient stories have told me it needs to look a certain way. Behind the story of the hero on the screen, there's vulnerability, there's pain, there's fear, there's all of it. There's also great joy, the ability to shed a tear when it's appropriate, to feel, to connect with other people beyond an intellectual level, but at a heart level. So my advice is explore, be open to just hold it up and look at it and say, what do I want to be as a man? How do I want to show up, as opposed to I feel this pressure to conform?
I love that. It's not an either or. No. This is another one of those both ends, right? That you can be the strong warrior and also the sensitive, caring man to the people around you. We talk to so many business leaders and organizational leaders where that's one of their big challenges. I have to demonstrate to my team I have it all together, that I'm leading the charge. Well, sometimes leading the charge is being the first. I go first to say I'm struggling, and to be open and vulnerable, and to really kind of where that's going. So, we're going to continue to talk about that. What's next on this whole series, Mindful Masculinity?
Well, we've got some great guests that are going to be coming on in future episodes. We do want to look. There's a couple of our other archetypes we're going to explore, so we invite you to tune in. Again, our goal is to hold these up so that you can readily recognize the value of them and how important it is to be able to channel or lean into those positive characteristics, and also avoid perhaps more and more some of the dark sides and the negative consequences of embracing those.
I can't wait. I just absolutely love that we're doing this series.
I love that we got to talk about movies and superheroes on the show.
It was great how we can tease that in.
And to know that Steve's favorite action movie, Schwarzenegger movie, True Lies. True Lies. You heard it here.
Good one.
You heard it here first, folks.
I might have to watch that one this weekend.
There you go.
Point. Hey, listen, thank you so much for tuning in. Want to encourage you to take some time to leave a comment. Why don't you share with us who your favorite superhero was and why? But share some comments in there. Like this. Maybe share it with a few people you think it will resonate with. Want to encourage you to go to our website, livingrichly.me. All kinds of great resources found there. Most importantly, I think, is the link to our 15-day Life Vision Challenge, an absolutely free course that you can take to help you figure out what really truly matters to you. My favorite part of it is having your own manifesto for your personal life. You can do all of that. The information, everything can be found there, as well as a link to our private Facebook group that is made up of, now probably at this time of this, 700-800 people who are all taking this journey together. So I want to encourage you to check out all of that information. You can find it again, livingrichly.me. Thank you so much for taking a part to listen in, to watch in on this episode. Can't wait for what we have in store next week. And until then, get out there and live your best life.